End is near? Biggest tragedy just happened in Jerusalem. The world is shocked and scared.
Speaks of fearful sights and great signs right before the end of the world. Apocalyptic. A strange phenomenon appeared in the skies over Tennessee, according to
Attends, ouais?
Ouais, moi c'est...
To protect collections.
Buildings destroyed, including a school and a hospital. Miraculously, no.
Jerusalem is not facing a single disaster or a series of unrelated incidents. What is unfolding now follows a disturbing pattern. The ground is collapsing without earthquakes or warnings. The air turns violent without storms. Unnatural lights tear across the sky, and fire forms where no flame should exist. Silent figures are reported appearing and vanishing without message or explanation. They are converging over one city, forcing a single, unsettling question. Why now? And why Jerusalem? If this made you stop and think, like the video and leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe to stay alert, because signs are only missed by those who stop watching. What is happening beneath Jerusalem cannot be explained away as ordinary geological fatigue or the slow decay of an ancient city finally surrendering to time. Entire sections of ground have collapsed without warning. Not after tremors, not following seismic alerts, and not in places known for failing infrastructure. The failures arrive suddenly, without the usual prelude, as if the earth itself has chosen the moment to give way. What makes these collapses deeply unsettling is not only their speed, but their behavior. This is not the familiar pattern of erosion, where cracks spread outward and surfaces fracture gradually. Instead, the ground collapses inward, folding down on itself, leaving behind voids that feel less like damage and more like removal. Streets that appeared solid moments earlier sink into silence, as if something beneath them has been taken away rather than worn down. Engineers and geologists search for explanations that fit established models, yet those models strain under the weight of what is being observed. Water erosion does not behave like this. Infrastructure failure does not behave like this. Tunneling collapse does not behave like this. The failure is abrupt, selective, and precise, occurring without the long warning signs that normally accompany such events. Even more disturbing is where these collapses are taking place. They are not limited to modern layers or recently developed areas, but strike beneath ancient stone foundations that have endured centuries of pressure. These foundations survived wars, earthquakes, sieges, and repeated destruction, holding firm when countless forces attempted to break them. That history of endurance is exactly what makes their sudden failure so alarming. The ground beneath Jerusalem did not weaken gradually. It did not announce fatigue. It behaved as though a support long assumed to be permanent had been withdrawn without notice. The imagery feels uncomfortably close to ancient warnings, describing an earth that is not merely worn down, but broken apart, split open, and violently shaken from within. Isaiah spoke of an earth utterly broken, not eroded, while the psalmist wrote of foundations shaken, as though stability itself had been revoked. For centuries, those words were read as distant prophecy or symbolic language. Now, as the ground beneath one of the most symbol-laden cities on earth begins to fail in ways that resist explanation, they no longer feel abstract. This is not chaos spreading outward, but collapse drawing inward. A reversal of expectation that feels deliberate rather than random. The fear does not come from destruction alone. It comes from the implication that something unseen is changing beneath the surface, altering the rules by which stability has always operated. When centuries of endurance offer no protection, when the ground no longer behaves like ground, an unsettling question remains in the hollow spaces left behind. If the foundations can be removed without warning, what else that once felt immovable may already be giving way unseen? What is unfolding in the atmosphere defies the logic people rely on to feel safe beneath the sky. These vortexes do not announce themselves with distant thunder, gathering clouds, or rising winds that offer even a few seconds of warning. They appear almost instantly, compact and violent, forming with a precision that feels intentional rather than chaotic. There is no gradual build, no visible transition from calm air to instability. One moment, the atmosphere appears ordinary. The next, it tightens into something aggressive and confined, as if the air has been twisted into a weapon. Meteorological explanations struggle almost immediately. There are no temperature fronts colliding, no storm systems advancing across radar, no pressure gradients capable of producing such behavior. Weather instruments remain largely silent, offering little to justify what witnesses are seeing with their own eyes. This absence is what makes the phenomenon unsettling, because nature usually leaves fingerprints. Here, the fingerprints are missing. The sky behaves as though the rules governing it have been temporarily suspended. The vortexes themselves do not behave like known wind formations. They are dense and tightly contained, not sprawling or erratic, and their movement feels deliberate rather than random. Damage is narrow and selective, cutting through specific areas with unnerving accuracy while leaving nearby spaces untouched. Objects are lifted, twisted, or displaced within tight corridors. Yet just a few meters away, everything remains undisturbed, as if an invisible boundary has been drawn in the air. This precision strips away the comfort of chance. Witnesses consistently describe sensations that go beyond what wind should produce. There is a crushing pressure, not just against the body, but inward, as if the air is pressing down on lungs and thoughts at the same time. Sound behaves strangely as well. Instead of the roar typically associated with violent wind, many report an unnatural silence, a stillness that settles before and after the event, making the brief eruption feel isolated in time. That silence lingers, amplifying fear rather than relieving it. This does not resemble desert wind, which arrives with heat and persistence, nor does it resemble a sandstorm that announces itself across the horizon. There is no gradual escalation, no familiar sensory warning. Instead, the air feels altered, distorted, as though compressed and released by something unseen. The atmosphere stops acting like a passive environment and starts behaving like an active force, capable of selecting where it strikes and where it spares. The most disturbing aspect is not the damage left behind, but the implication carried by its precision. If the air can tighten, strike, and withdraw without warning or explanation, then safety becomes an assumption rather than a guarantee. These events do not scream for attention with spectacle. They unsettle through restraint, through the feeling that something powerful moved briefly through the space and then chose to leave. If this description leaves you uneasy, like the video and keep watching, because moments like this are rarely understood when they happen, and the pattern only becomes visible to those who continue paying attention. What unfolds in the sky resists every familiar category the human mind reaches for in moments of uncertainty. It does not behave like weather advancing across a horizon, nor like an optical illusion produced by distance or light. The darkness above begins to fracture, no longer holding its shape, no longer acting as empty space. Lines of light tear through it, twisting and folding in on themselves, refusing stability, refusing explanation. These are not gentle glows drifting with air currents, but sharp, restless forms that seem under strain, as though the sky itself is carrying pressure it can no longer contain. Their motion unsettles precisely because it defies both order and chaos. There is no symmetry to follow, no rhythm to anticipate, yet nothing about the movement feels accidental. The lights surge, cross, recoil, and tighten, behaving less like natural phenomena and more like reactions. They do not scatter as reflections would. They do not fade like atmospheric effects. Instead, they appear compressed, charged, held in place by forces unseen, as if energy is being restrained rather than released. As seconds stretch on, the sensation shifts. What initially looks like something occurring above begins to feel as though it is passing through the sky itself. The air between observer and light feels thinner, compromised. Distance loses meaning. The separation between ground and heavens weakens, and with it, the comfort that comes from believing the sky is unreachable, uninvolved, safely removed. Then, without warning, restraint collapses. The lights do not dissolve or drift away. They rupture. Sudden flashes tear across the darkness in violent bursts, overwhelming sight and orientation in an instant. There is no build-up, no visual signal, no moment to prepare. One frame holds motion, the next holds detonation. The transition is immediate, disorienting, leaving witnesses frozen between what they saw and what they failed to understand. And then, nothing. The footage ends at the precise moment clarity should begin. No continuation, no aftermath, no confirmation of what followed the eruption. In an age where every second is documented and every angle preserved, this absence feels wrong. The silence that follows the flashes presses harder than sound ever could. The missing seconds become more disturbing than the spectacle itself, forcing viewers to imagine what the camera did not capture and what the witnesses may not have been able to process. Attempts at explanation arrive late and hollow. Scientific terminology struggles to keep pace with the experience itself. Models feel too slow, too mechanical, too detached from the immediacy of what occurred. Instead, older language rises uninvited. Viewers recall Luke 21:11, not as metaphor or analysis, but as recognition. Fearful sights and great signs from heaven does not explain the event, but it mirrors the sensation it leaves behind. The words feel observational rather than symbolic, as though written for moments exactly like this. Something fundamental shifts in perception. The sky no longer reads as background or emptiness. It no longer feels neutral. It feels engaged, responsive, capable of action. The upward gaze that once carried calm now carries tension. The awareness that whatever appeared was not merely seen, but expressed with intent. At that point, the lights themselves lose importance. What matters is what they represent. When the sky stops behaving like distant space and begins behaving like presence, the boundary humanity relies on for psychological safety begins to erode. And once that boundary weakens, fear is no longer about what might fall from above. It becomes about what the heavens themselves have begun to do. And whether this was an anomaly or the opening movement of something far larger, already unfolding. What witnesses describe defies the basic distinction humanity relies on. To feel oriented in the world, the separation between air and fire. Clouds that should drift or disperse instead begin rotating with extreme speed, tightening into violent motion that feels less like weather and more like strain. This is not the slow build of a storm front or the towering formation of thunderheads announcing lightning. The movement is abrupt, compressed, and unnaturally focused, as if the sky itself has been twisted into tension. As the rotation intensifies, the atmosphere begins to glow, not with the brief flash of electricity, but with sustained illumination, as though friction alone has crossed a threshold and ignited. Light blooms within the clouds, uneven and alive, carrying the unmistakable quality of flame without any visible source. Observers struggle to reconcile what they are seeing, because fire is not supposed to exist there, suspended in air, detached from ground, fuel, or storm. Yet, the glow persists long enough to erase doubt, replacing confusion with dread. Sound arrives next, but not the kind expected. Instead of thunder, there is a dry, metallic resonance that cuts through the air, sharp and unnatural, as if massive structures are grinding against one another somewhere above. The noise does not roll or echo like weather. It presses inward, making the space feel enclosed rather than open. People report an instinctive urge to cover their ears, not because of volume alone, but because the sound feels wrong, as though it does not belong in the environment producing it. Heat follows quickly, spreading in waves that do not behave like passing warmth. Temperatures rise rapidly, causing discomfort and panic as skin begins to sting and itch. This is not radiant heat drifting from a distant fire, but something immediate and enveloping, as if the air itself has become hostile. The sensation is invasive, producing physical reactions before the mind can form explanation. Witnesses later struggle to describe how something intangible like air could suddenly carry such intensity. Then, without warning or gradual release, it ends. The rotation stops, the glow extinguishes, the sound vanishes. There is no fading, no dissipation, no transition back to normal conditions. One moment the sky appears to be burning. The next, it behaves as though nothing happened at all. The sudden absence is as unsettling as the event itself, leaving behind an eerie calm that feels imposed rather than natural. This is not fire rising from the ground, and it is not lightning descending from storms. There is no fuel, no ignition point, no atmospheric explanation that accounts for all elements at once. What remains is the disturbing impression that the atmosphere itself crossed into a state it was never meant to occupy. When air begins to burn without fire, when heat, light, and sound emerge without source, the fear goes beyond danger. It touches something more fundamental: the realization that the rules governing the world may not be as fixed as once believed, and that for a brief moment, the sky revealed what it is capable of becoming. The fire that tears through Jerusalem does not behave like a disaster that wandered in by chance. It erupts as if summoned, breaking out at the precise moment when instability has already begun to surface beneath the city and above it. Flames rip through urban space with a ferocity that overwhelms response times, swallowing buildings, choking streets with smoke, and forcing people into flight with no warning and no sense of control. Casualties follow, destruction compounds. But the most corrosive damage is not structural. It is psychological. A deep, visceral shock grips the city as the realization sets in that this blaze is not standing alone. Jerusalem has endured fire before, repeatedly, across centuries of conquest, rebellion, and war. Yet those infernos carried clear authors. Armies advanced, torches were lit, orders were given, and history recorded the cause. This fire offers no such clarity. Footage spreads rapidly, showing walls of flame and suffocating darkness. Yet every attempt to frame the event collapses under its own weight. It is not pronounced an act of divine judgment, and it cannot be comfortably filed away as a random malfunction or human error. Each explanation feels thin, evasive, almost dishonest, as though naming a cause would diminish something far larger at work. Fear multiplies because the fire arrives in sequence, not isolation. The ground had already shown signs of internal failure. The air had already turned volatile without storms, The sky had already behaved in ways that defied expectation. Now the city itself ignites, completing a chain that feels deliberate rather than coincidental. People sense this alignment instinctively. When destruction stacks instead of scatters, the human mind recognizes pattern, even when language fails. The fire does not need to speak. Its timing does the work for it. The symbolic gravity of Jerusalem magnifies the terror. This is not merely a populated area suffering loss, but a city that carries the weight of covenant, prophecy, blood, and prayer, layered over thousands of years. Every flame feels amplified, every collapse feels charged, as though the city itself is being tested under pressure. The sight of Jerusalem burning does not remain local. It radiates outward, unsettling observers far beyond the immediate perimeter, because history has trained the world to watch this place closely when it begins to convulse. What makes this moment especially disturbing is the absence of resolution. The footage does not instruct viewers what to believe. It does not soothe with certainty or absolve with dismissal. It leaves behind a vacuum filled only by two questions that refuse to be silenced. Why did this ignite now, after everything that preceded it? Why did it erupt here, in a city that has already endured so much? Jerusalem has burned countless times, but rarely at a moment when earth, air, and sky were already showing signs of strain. This time, the fire feels like part of a convergence, not an exception. If something in this sequence feels impossible to ignore, comment what stands out to you most, because patterns are often recognized first by those willing to name what others hesitate to see. These appearances do not arrive with spectacle or excess. They arrive with precision. Witnesses struggle to describe movement because movement is not the point. One moment, there is nothing. The next, there is a form. Fully present, fully defined, occupying space as though it has always belonged there. The figure carries a human outline, but the resemblance ends there. Proportion feels familiar, yet the presence does not register as human in any emotional or instinctive way. Light surrounds it without origin, not cast outward like illumination, but held close, clinging to the form like a garment that reflects no texture and no material. It does not flutter or shift. It simply exists. Wings are visible, unmistakable in shape and scale, yet they remain folded, restrained, as if movement is unnecessary. Nothing about the posture suggests arrival or departure. It suggests completion. What transforms these encounters from strange to unbearable is the refusal to communicate. There is no speech, no gesture, no acknowledgement of the witness standing only meters away. Fear, prayer, movement, even panic fail to provoke response. The presence does not observe in any recognizable sense. It does not react. It does not warn. It does not instruct. It simply remains, long enough to be seen, long enough to be remembered, and then it is gone, not fading, not retreating, not dissolving, removed, as if the moment itself has been edited out of reality. Scripture presents two distinct patterns of angelic appearance, and the difference between them is crucial. When time remains, angels speak. They intervene. They warn, instruct, and redirect. Their messages exist because outcomes are still fluid. But there is another pattern, far more severe and far less discussed. When decisions are already fixed, angels appear without words. In those moments, explanation becomes irrelevant. Silence is no longer absence. It is confirmation. The terror does not peak during the encounter. It arrives afterward. Witnesses describe a delayed impact, a realization that what occurred was not meant to frighten or guide, but to acknowledge. The sensation is not raw fear, but finality, a deep, internal certainty that something has advanced beyond a point of negotiation. Human reaction feels suddenly small, almost inappropriate, as though response itself has been rendered obsolete. This dread sharpens when these appearances are placed alongside everything else that has unfolded. Ground collapsing inward, air behaving with hostility, fire forming without source, the sky no longer acting as distance. These figures do not interrupt that sequence. They do not arrive to stop it. They appear as though observing it, marking it. Wings remain folded because intervention is unnecessary. Speech is withheld because meaning has already been set. After the disappearance, witnesses report the same unsettling detail. Sound returns slowly, as if the environment itself hesitates before resuming. The air feels thinner, altered, subtly unstable. Reality does not snap back into place. It resumes with reluctance. The memory of the encounter does not fade with time. It sharpens. It settles. People understand instinctively that what they witnessed was never meant to be decoded, only recognized. This is what makes these appearances intolerable to process. Silence here is not mystery. It is verdict, not warning, but confirmation, not absence, but presence stripped of mercy. Something has already been decided, and the world, whether ready or not, is now moving forward without being asked. What makes this moment different is not only what has happened in Jerusalem, but how the world reacts to it. News spreads fast, footage circulates, headlines repeat the same words: shocked, terrified, unprecedented. Yet beneath that surface noise, something far more unsettling takes hold. The fear does not erupt into chaos. It freezes. The world looks on, aware that what is unfolding in Jerusalem does not belong to the category of ordinary tragedy. This is not an event people rush to explain away. It is one they hesitate to touch. Jerusalem has seen destruction before, and history usually responds with clear language: war, attack, accident, disaster. This time, language feels inadequate. Commentators speak carefully. Officials choose restraint. Analysts circle the edges without entering the center. The hesitation itself becomes visible. When the most watched city on earth begins to convulse in ways that defy sequence and logic, the instinct is not to shout, but to slow down, as if speaking too boldly might make something worse. Fear spreads globally, but it does not behave like panic. There are no mass protests, no sudden migrations, no worldwide breakdown. Instead, there is fixation. Screens replay the same images. Viewers rewatch the same moments. The ground giving way, the sky behaving strangely, fire tearing through a city already saturated with meaning. People do not look away, they stare. Shock settles into the nervous system, producing a quiet dread that feels heavier than noise ever could. This reaction reveals something important. The world senses that Jerusalem is not simply experiencing a crisis, but signaling something larger. When disaster strikes elsewhere, sympathy flows outward. When it strikes Jerusalem, attention collapses inward. The city acts like a pressure point. What happens there reverberates beyond geography, touching belief, memory, prophecy, and fear all at once. That is why the shock feels disproportionate. It is not about the scale of destruction alone, but about where it is happening and when. The fear deepens because the events refuse to remain isolated. The fire does not stand alone. It arrives after instability in the ground, disturbance in the air, and disruption in the sky. Observers may not articulate the pattern clearly, but they feel it. Sequence creates meaning, even when explanation fails. The mind recognizes alignment long before it finds words for it. What follows is a collective pause. Governments watch. Media waits. The public listens for something definitive that never comes. No voice declares what this means. No authority closes the question. That unresolved state becomes the source of anxiety. The world is shocked not only by what has happened, but by the realization that no one seems fully in control of what comes next. Jerusalem stands burning, unstable, watched by millions who sense that this is not just another chapter of conflict or disaster. It feels like a marker, a moment that forces attention, a moment that does not answer questions, but sharpens them. And as fear settles into silence across the world, one thought lingers beneath the shock and the dread. If this can happen here, in this city, under these conditions, then what phase has already begun, and how close are we to what follows next? If this moment made you pause, like the video and leave a comment with what stood out to you most. Subscribe to stay alert, and thank you for watching and staying with us as these events continue to unfold.